And let me tell you a little bit about her. She's a British Ghanaian writer, broadcaster, academic, former barrister, known for her insightful work on race, identity, culture, and social justice. She was actually born in Stavanger in Norway. If you ever fly over to the States, you see Norway, you see this place called Stavanger. It's the only time I know. I only associate it with that and with this lady. But from Norway, she was raised in South London and studied PPE, the famous politics, philosophy, and economics, beloved of UK prime ministers, at Oxford University, and later qualified as a human rights barrister. She transitioned to journalism, I think around about the time I first met you, in 2005, that big year, Africa '05. She worked at The Guardian, served as West Africa correspondent in Accra, Ghana, Accra, before becoming Sky News' social affairs and education editor. She is Afua Hirsch, of course. The author of British, published in 2018, it was a Sunday Times bestseller examining racial identity in Britain. Equal to Everything, it was a children's book about Lady Hale, the first female president of the UK Supreme Court. And Decolonizing My Body, published a couple of years ago, a memoir exploring beauty, ancestry, and healing. She's a celebrated documentary presenter known for Enslaved. He presented it with Samuel L. Jackson. African Renaissance, also in 2020, and Africa Rising with Afua Hirsch in 2023, which showcased African histories and cultural movements. Before you meet her in the flesh, please, let's see her on film.
Stepping out of place, you're full of fire.
Our country is at a pivotal moment. But do we know our own identity? It's a simple question, but where are you from? I grew up here, but naming Britain as my home wasn't always enough. It was as if the way I looked required a longer explanation. There weren't many other people around here who looked like me, and I faced a constant struggle, trying to pretend my otherness didn't exist, attempting to fit in. I spent my whole life wondering, is this really my country? Is this truly where I belong? My name is Afua Hirsch. My mother is from Ghana. My family were forced to flee the Ashanti Kingdom by Robert Baden-Powell in 1896. My father is British. My Jewish family fled Nazi Germany in 1939. I'm black, mixed race, and British. What's your story? Where are you from?
Glow like diamond and pearl. Alright, y'all, you back it up. Don't patch up. Get on it up. Bubble up.
Please welcome Afua Hirsch. I have to hug you. I didn't know, right? Can you believe it? You come on stage and you get Jerusalem, my word.
Wow, thank you so much. Like everyone, I'm stunned and shocked by the VT.
No,
and,
be happy. Get
grateful.
your flowers today while you're still here.
I'd just like to say hello, everyone. What a beautiful congregation of incredible entrepreneurs. It's a real honor to be here. And I also want to correct you.
Ooh.
I first met Henry when I was 18. He's forgotten.
Oh, dear.
He was and remains a role model of mine. I was completely starstruck the first time I met Henry. And I don't know if I've ever told you this, but you were a huge influence in modeling for me that I could have a career in which I could unapologetically be myself and take up space on big platforms in the national media.
Well, you've never told me that. Say it again, please.
Well overdue, well overdue, well overdue.
Thank you very much. Genuinely, I appreciate that. People rarely hear that. Normally, this kind of thing is reserved for when they're lying in a box, but no, it's great to see it here. So thank you.
You need your flowers now, Henry.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You know, so when I remembered first meeting you, you were a young barrister, and it was at the Africa '05 gathering. I think it was in Windsor Great Park.
That was very memorable.
That was very, very memorable.
Not least because there was a fist fight that broke out.
Yes, between Bob Geldof and 3 African women. But anyway.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, no, it was unpleasant. I had to play the Kofi Annan peacemaker. But you were a young barrister, and I assumed you were going to forge a career in law. And then you moved this way and that way. You shimmied, you bobbed, and you weaved. And here you are today. And when you look at where you are today, how satisfied are you?
I couldn't be more satisfied. Not because my journey's been perfect. I don't think anyone could honestly say they haven't made mistakes and they haven't had things that didn't work out. And also not because there weren't other influences. I mean, it's been very affirming to hear other people speak about what it's like to be the child of Black immigrants. You are going to pursue a professional qualification as if your life depends on it. If you ask me why I became a barrister, I could tell you a very convincing story about my commitment to justice, my desire to be part of constitutional growth on the African continent, to advocate and litigate for human rights. But I could also tell you that my mother was damn gonna make sure I became a barrister.
Oh,
and that would equally be true. So my philosophy for life is to always be growing and always, importantly for me, interrogating the structures in the society around me. I've learned from a young age that nobody in my life was going to equip me to understand the society I was growing up in. Nobody explained colonialism. No one explained why we were in the country. No one explained why people would say they didn't see race while simultaneously racializing you. None of this was spelled out. It wasn't in the curriculum. Even your own parents are struggling to navigate it themselves. Having, in my mother's case, been the product of a colonial education, she learned more about the British royal family than she did about Ghanaian history growing up in Ghana in the 1950s. So you have to work it out for yourself. And I saw that and understood that I was going to have to decipher this very coded, very complex history that was affecting me in real time. So what I set out to do was to make decisions with integrity and purpose at each stage based on the information I had. And I look back now at some of those decisions and I've grown so much that I can see the flaw in the thinking, but I'm proud that I did the best I could at the time. And I was always focused on how can I move forward, and not just as an individual, but as part of the collective, because for one reason or another, I've always had such a strong sense of Black community and of wanting my work to impact us all, wanting to be the person I needed when I was younger, wanting to help us develop a language for the things that no one's equipped us to understand.
And when it comes to interrogating the various institutions that you've either inhabited or challenged, so whether it's Oxford University, whether it's the Bar, whether it's Sky News, The Pledge, remember that program, The Pledge, or any of the other institutions you have run up against, which one have you found most challenging, most difficult to penetrate, most difficult to take down, if that's what your intention was? Was it Nelson in Trafalgar Square? That was quite memorable.
There have been lots of memorable moments.
Yes.
I think what I've really learned, I have had the privilege of accessing many parts of the establishment, and it's incredible how much continuity there is. And that's not a compliment. So, I was at the Bar. When you become a barrister that this is basically a medieval institution that is absolutely at the core of kind of race, class, imperial power in Britain, and still incredibly old-fashioned, patriarchal, white. You kind of know what you're signing up to when you enter that world. You don't realize when you go to the Guardian newspaper, the bastion of liberal thought, that it's going to be the same people from the same backgrounds with the same ideas.
And aren't these people who believe they're on the side of the angels?
Yeah, of course they do. And that makes it harder in a way because there's not so much humility. It was really interesting, actually, just looking at Lydia's data, which I really enjoyed. I can't see Lydia now. I loved listening to you, Lydia. To see the Telegraph, the Times, among the organizations that were receptive to your work. I didn't see The Guardian. And, that doesn't surprise me because, and I don't know exactly who you've worked with, but I have found as a journalist that the news organizations that actually occupy the right wing in the national narrative, in a way they can't afford to exclude Black people, partly because their content is so problematic. They at least need to be seen to be engaging with Black people. But the liberal left have the complacency and arrogance that they don't actually need to work with actual Black people or actual people from working class backgrounds. I had people say to me at The Guardian, we think diversity. It's in our intellectual DNA. Yes. And just the utter pomposity of it was incredibly frustrating. I still write for The Guardian, and one of the things that's a reality for us, and I'm sure many people in this room can relate to this, is that you have to work out how to use the platforms that serve you on your mission for your purpose. I never judge people for who they work with or what they engage with. As long as you know what you're trying to do, what your end game is, if that is something that's based on service, that you care about the wider cause, do you. Like, we're all in the game, and it's a hustle. So, I, at a younger age, maybe was more idealistic and really looked up to The Guardian and thought this was really where human rights and equality lived, only to discover it was the same thing, different day. And there are things about it I love, and there are things about it that I critique out of love as robustly as I can.
Fantastic. There's so many areas to cover. Let me focus on this one. You said, do you? The question is, what is you? Now, many people here will have read your book, Brit, in brackets, Ish. And the question is, who is Afua Hirsch? Because we know there's a Norwegian side in terms of by birth.
You are the only person who has ever referenced Stavanger in my biography, by the way.
I used to fly across to the States. And you say, oh, Stavanger, okay, that's where it's from. So your father's heritage, identity, your mother's heritage, identity. There's the Oxford identity. There's the Wimbledon identity. There's the Ghana, as in you going there as a correspondent and being around West Africa at a time when, I think, was it Mali that was falling at the time?
Yeah, well, when I became the West Africa correspondent for The Guardian, it was 2011. Ghana had the fastest growing GDP in the world, 14%. And I specifically and intentionally went into that role with a mission to tell different stories about the African continent. Yep. Specifically not the stereotypical cliche stories about war and disaster. And of course, about 1 month into my tenure, the war in Mali started, and that was literally the only story any British media organization was interested in. So that was challenging. But yes, it was that time.
Right. Okay, so this British and this conundrum that you were trying to resolve in yourself and that you were throwing out to the people, both who read your book and hadn't read it. Have you begun to resolve British, the question mark?
I've realized that identity is not a destination. It's a journey. It's a question about what your values are, who your people are, what you believe you were put on this earth to do. I think a large part of it is spiritual. Yeah. It's not about your DNA. Race, as we know, is a social construct. I'm not a biological essentialist. I don't think that you need to prove what percentage of your genes come from Black ancestors before you have a legitimate role to play in Black community. What I do think is that the question of who are your people, what cause are you about, what is the hill you're willing to die on, what do you want your legacy to be, is a question that each person individually has to answer. I have always felt unequivocal that I belong to Black community. I have always felt connected to my Ghanaian ancestry. I've always been cognizant of the unfairness in Britain as a Black person, the systems and structures that work against us, that don't allow us to thrive and do justice to our genius and our innovation and our creativity. And I've always felt compelled to lend my energy and ideas to that cause. It's not that I don't love other people and other communities, but this is where I feel useful and what I care about. And I think we all have the right to make that choice. And so and because of my heritage, I have a lot of people of multiple heritage who are attracted to my work and read my book, and they often come and ask me, like, I'm only half Black, and, or I was adopted, I don't even know where my parents come from, or, I have a Caribbean heritage, I don't know what part of Africa my ancestors came from. We have such complex histories and identities as Black people in the diaspora. And, I always encourage them not to let this idea, which was designed for us, that by having been removed from Africa, either through empire or migration or enslavement, that we can't find a connection. You get to choose your own connection, and you get to decide how you want your life to serve it.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to that connection with Africa, being part of the African diaspora, how strong is yours? Because there are many people who talk about Africa or the Caribbean all the time. They rarely go. They have no intention of living there, probably will never start a business there. And it's emotional because they have relatives there, but deep down they could never live there. And their relationship is quite problematic. It's checkered. What is yours like now with Ghana and the wider African consciousness?
I've always felt it was important for me to live and work in Ghana, both so that I am investing in Ghana, that I am putting money into the economy, that I'm upskilling people around me, but also so that I can navigate in Ghana, because someone like me wasn't really designed to be able to do that very effectively.
I read in one of your, I think, well, I can't remember what part in your book, you and, was it your partner at the time, went down to, was it Pram Pram, or one part of Ghana, or was Afua, is it? And then you had an encounter with some, area boys.
Yes, we had an encounter with area boys.
Yes.
Yeah, one of several.
And at that point you thought, I need to get back to Wimbledon.
It was important for me to be able to work in Ghana, to be able to equip myself to navigate Ghanaian society, not just to be a diasporan who talks about the motherland and hasn't actually tried to make something work there. And on a bigger scale, when I founded my film and TV company, I called it Born in Me. The reason my company is called Born in Me is because one of my favorite Kwame Nkrumah quotes is the one where he said, "I am not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa is born in me." Yes. And that is a guiding mantra for me. And there was an intentionality when I started my company that I want to make TV and film that entertains, that is mainstream, that makes money, that will stay in our community. I also want to move us forward. I want to educate through entertainment. I want to do justice to our stories. And ultimately, I would like to build my company on the African continent as well. And you know, it's still challenging to make premium film and TV on the African continent outside of South Africa. But for me, it's very important that from the absolute founding of my company, that is part of its mission and part of my intention. So I do think it's important to match the way we talk and reference our heritage with actually understanding it. And also, you know, to be really honest, like, we can be problematic too. Yeah. You know, I definitely, earlier times when I would visit Ghana, had almost ironically a kind of colonial nostalgia for the Ghana that my grandmother told me about, and would be frustrated at the pace of change and, you know, the way that Ghanaians were developing Ghana. And, you know, I had to really humble myself to realize that actually the fact that we have heritage and blackness doesn't mean that we're immune from bringing some of the baggage of having grown up in a colonial country like Britain back to our people.
As they say to me, you're still Obroni.
There you go. We have a way of saying things very succinctly in Ghana.
Obroni just means a foreigner, white man. Or in Nigeria, is it Oyibo?
Every African country has a word for it.
There's always a word. People who follow you on Instagram know that you talk a lot. You promote books, of course. You talk about history. But you also talk a lot about beauty and fashion. Explain the importance of that, because you're quite glam.
I don't know if I need to explain that to this audience looking around.
Maybe you don't, but I mean, but some people who don't know you very well will be surprised that somebody who seems to be on the front line, is an activist, doing all these things, is also very, very keen on promoting fashion. And in that book you wrote, Decolonizing My Body, there's a link with that, I think.
Yeah, I think I'm not a fan of binaries, having grown up on the wrong side of many of them. And I definitely had this idea that to be a serious person who has something to contribute socially, politically, economically, you need to shun some of the aspects of femininity that our ancestors would have regarded as a holistic part of existing in a body. So, you know, even though I've always loved fashion and found it a way to express my creativity and identity, I felt like that would undermine my seriousness in the public domain. If I'm talking about Brexit, I shouldn't look too good, right? Yeah. And, you know, that is a very Eurocentric construction. It's very natural and intuitive to us, I think, to care deeply about how we present ourselves. And no, not just as a visual thing, but also as a kind of ritual, the rituals of the way we bathe and do our hair and adorn our bodies. I've become more interested in the deeper meaning behind those rituals as well. So there's a level in which, look, I just love fashion. I love jewelry and adornment. And I love the design and the creativity of what many of our Black British designers are doing. But there's also a deeper level where I'm interested in reconnecting with some of the ideas that were lost. And, you know, it's so important. It's been so important for me to understand that colonialism was not just the drawing of boundaries on maps, the exploitation of resources like gold and cocoa, the imposition of European-style political systems. It was the destruction of our indigenous knowledge systems, and it was the mental colonization of persuading us that anything European is better than what our ancestors did for millennia, which, by the way, many European ideas are based on because they stole them. while persuading us we have nothing to offer. So I am relentless about going back. And I'm not a Luddite. I'm not saying I wish I could go back to 2,000 years ago and live exactly as everyone did then. I'm saying, what have we lost that was crucial to our well-being, our mental health, our survival? So much of the climate crisis is linked to this European idea that destroying natural resources and accumulating excess is progress. None of our ancestors lived like that. They understood the power and the crucial necessity of living in a much more sustainable way. They wouldn't have had the word sustainability. You don't need a word for it. It's just common sense. So, we can't tap into that until we start to dismantle some of our own colonial thinking that constantly makes us look towards Eurocentric culture as superior, as having a monopoly over genius and invention. And I include myself. I was raised in the belly of the beast, in this country, believing that science and reason and development and progress comes from white men. And it's one of the greatest lies ever told. And so one of the things I use my storytelling for is dismantling it piece by piece, starting with my own body.
Fantastic. Afua, thank you very much indeed for that. And I would remind you, if you haven't seen them already, Afua's done some great documentaries, Enslaved with Samuel L. Jackson, African Renaissance. That was also in 2020, Africa Rising with Afua Hirsch. Please do. I'm sure you can still get those.
Yeah, you can.
Brilliant. Okay, we haven't got a huge amount of time. You've got a hard stop, haven't you? At about...
I'm here for you, Henry.
I'm blessed. Okay, let's get one or two questions. Keep them brief, please, so that we can get more time for the answers. Let's have a look. Yes, wait a minute. Have you spoken? You've spoken already. Let me see somebody who hasn't spoken. No, nothing, no shade. But people haven't yet spoken. Okay, over to you, because nobody came forward. Yes. But you've got to be like that. Yes.
Thank you for blessing us with your presence today. That's the first thing I wanted to say. What I wanted to ask you is, how do you feel about the education system and about how we're teaching our kids these days? We're talking a lot about business and whatever, but I want to know what we're going to do to teach people how to get in.
Thank you so much. It's a really important question. I start with a different question, which is, if we were to design an education system from scratch for all young people and for our young people, what would it look like? I guarantee it would look nothing like what we have. Nothing. The origin of our education system was to mold factory workers for the Industrial Revolution. It was to create a society of pacified people who were willing to exchange their labor for a salary to serve the colonial machine of industry. They were not to think, they were not to challenge, they were not to critique or ask questions. They were to do low intellect manual labor. And that, by the way, is a story that affects white working class British people more than anyone. We were assimilated into that already unfair system on the most punitive terms. So we shouldn't be surprised that our education system is not fit for purpose. It is not teaching us to think critically. It's not teaching us to innovate, to build. We're training young people for jobs that won't even exist by the time they finish school, let alone in 10 years. It's not fit for purpose. And the problem that I have in this country specifically, although it affects basically every industrialized country, is that we're tinkering around the edges. We're still refusing to acknowledge the inherent unfairness. We're in denial about how completely obsolete the entire structure is. And on top of that, we have all of this political weaponization. We don't even change our exam system and our school agenda every time there's a new government, every time there's a new education secretary. If you look at countries that have the most successful education systems, one thing they all have in common, no matter how different they are, say take Japan and Finland, couldn't be more different. What they share in common is a cross-party consensus and commitment to a long-term education strategy based on the question, what do our young people need? And for us, thinking about what that looks like, this is one area where I think Pan-Africanism has so much to offer us. If you look at the generation of Pan-African leaders, their starting point is, what are the spiritual, intellectual, and socioeconomic needs of our young people to build our country in a way that reflects who we are and allows us to thrive? So they knew inherently that the Victorian British education system wasn't the answer. But of course, they were taken out. You know, they were taken out by assassination, by coups, which were sponsored by Western governments, then by structural adjustment, by Bretton Woods institutions. And so now, even worse than what we have here, we have like a poor imitation of that in African countries where it's even less suited to meeting our needs. So I favor a very, very radical approach to thinking about education. And it starts with the question you asked. It's such an important question. We have to keep asking it and insisting that we won't stop asking it until we hear answers that actually address the foundational problem.
Brilliant.
Thank
you very much. There's time for one more question. Right there? Yeah, okay, yeah.
Just want to say thank you very much. It's been really exciting to kind of hear you speak. So my name is Brian Channon from the Black Policy Institute, and I just want to ask you a quick question about Britishness. So what does it mean to you today, and how has it changed in most recent years?
Thank you very much.
Britishness
Very brave to ask someone who wrote a whole book called British. I think the reason I wrote that book was because I observed that so many of the most talented people I know who have had their whole lives in education in Britain feel excluded from the concept of Britishness as an identity, whether that's in the way we hyphenate. You know, we never are British, we're always Black British, or, you know, even random Afro-Saxon. I mean, we come up with crazy ways of avoiding saying we're British. That's how uncomfortable we are with it. I think that's a rational response to a national identity that was built to exclude us. I mean, Britain didn't exist as a concept in the way it does now until of the period of Victorian empire building. It was a political invention to serve propaganda purposes. So again, why would it fit us? I think I'm increasingly alienated, though, by nationalist rhetoric. I haven't seen an example of it anywhere that isn't contributing to a kind of populism that's making us less intelligent and less resilient. So I'm now really more interested in communities that share values, really. And, you know, I'm interested in being in a community of people who share my values, who want to form a common vision. How can we organize and move forward together? And, you know, the world we're in, I think the opportunities actually are that is more important. You know, borders are meaningless. We live in a transnational world. It's increasingly becoming globalized to the point that even the language of globalization is obsolete. And so, you know, I think identity and belonging is really important. That's why I write about it. But now I'm grateful that British never fit me, because it's made me have to evolve into a much more sophisticated way of thinking about identity.
Great.
Thank you.
Afua, we're now at 0. Do you have time for one more question, or do you have to go? Somebody right at the front, right there.
Hello.
One more question, that's it. Last one.
Hello, Afua.
Hello.
I love you so much. I'm a journalist as well, and you are one of my biggest inspirations. So thank you for everything you said today. What I want to ask you is, how have you navigated attracting funding or capital with your media business, particularly because I also am interested in how we can tell stories that educate our own community, the Pan-African, the Afro-diasporan community all around the world. And when you're telling these sort of stories, it goes against the dominant narratives.
Yeah.
So how have you kind of navigated building a business that goes against the stories that they don't want us to tell each other, basically?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for what you said. Nice to meet you. Thank you for asking this question. I think it's important for us to be ambitious in our businesses. And I was never interested in kind of the scraps of scarcity that existed within the TV industry here. So I went to America. The short answer to your question is get American money. I have a theory about Blackness, and basically everybody likes someone else's Black people. Americans think we're really exotic because we're British. And they are not so excited by their own Black people. We love Black Americans, think they're really exotic because they're American. So everyone's like going in the other direction. Like whatever works, you know? When I go to America, I come with a spirit of great humility, because if it weren't for the struggles that African Americans fought, we wouldn't even be able to go to America. The whole world would look different. Yeah. So I'm super deferential to the African American experience. But I also feel a sense of community with African Americans, and I understand the opportunity for me to attract resources in America in a way that I couldn't here. And of course, when you get American investment, suddenly British people who weren't willing to throw scraps at you suddenly think you're a megastar. So you just got to be really strategic, but you have to think big, you know, and we also have to anticipate the fall of America rapidly accelerating. And I'm really excited for when I can have the kind of meetings I have in LA, in Lagos and Accra, and meet people who want to invest in our storytelling, because the opportunity isn't, I'm not asking for charity, like it's an undeniable commercial opportunity, but we're just not quite there yet. But the minute we are, I will be switching my business that way. But right now, I'm unashamedly tapping that dollar. Thank you for asking.
Brilliant. Afua, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Afua Hirsch, thank you very much indeed. Great stuff. Fantastic. Come here, you. Oh, thank you. It's been so long as well. Anyway, I'm now swimming. Afua, thank you very much indeed. Definitely catch up. Brilliant stuff.